Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first parallel session of today after lunch. We hope you all had some delicious nutrition and didn't feel too deprived after our extended session this morning. Sorry for the slight delays here, technical difficulties, but I think we're all online and everyone can hear and there's no more nasty speaks. So let's begin. This is the session 2.2, the Vulnerability To Viability Approach. Conceptual, methodological, and practical considerations for building strong small-scale fisheries. We're going to start with an introductory presentation from Pratik, Nayak, and myself. And then we have a series of 6 presentations, a maximum of 10 minutes each. We're going to keep everyone to time because we want to allow time for a discussion session at the end. So we'll begin. Pratik Nayak is a professor at the University of Waterloo, and he's leading the B2B project. Pratik.
Thank you very much, Alida, and thanks for being here. It looks very odd, something just in front of you. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the B2B notion. What does it mean? And introduce the partnership to you. And then talk about a bit about our methodological approach and pass it on to Alida. So, so if you look at the work on vulnerability, there are multiple ways in which vulnerability has been defined. As you can see, some of our work in 2020, where we actually were able to capture 12 different ways in which vulnerability has been talked about by different scholars. So people talk about vulnerability in terms of fisheries being power, fisheries being life, fisheries being collective action and the failure of collective action, and then fisheries being social movement. So there are different ways in which vulnerability has been talked about. And if you look at that particular way people have defined it, we see that vulnerability and viability, for that matter, are multidimensional, and it is mainly so in the context of small-scale fisheries. Again, vulnerability can be or have been expressed using various approaches, various lenses. So it would be low resiliency, exposure, weakness, livelihood loss, and food insecurity. At the same time, viability or sustainable fisheries or small-scale fisheries can be seen as sustainability and fertility as well, being and various of those terms. But the key issue here is that vulnerability or viability has most of the time been talked about in isolation from each other. So you try to understand vulnerability, you try to understand how to get to viability. But the notion that we kind of been working on is to see how small-scale fisheries So talking about both together, is something that is what I'm going to talk about today. If I can have attention from everyone in this room, so I'll try to make my presentation within the 5 minutes, then I can hand it over to Alida, and then we can get to the next presentations. So just think of a situation if the small-scale fisheries that we have been talking about were only vulnerable for generations, they would have perished by now. The fact that they have been moving, they have been going on, and there are many things that is happening in those communities suggests that there are some strengths and there are some elements that have worked in their favor to keep them going. So to say that a small-scale fisheries community or a system is either completely viable or completely vulnerable is not something that we are seeing or nor we will see in future. There are elements of the small-scale fisheries systems that are more towards the viability, and the other elements could be more towards vulnerability. So it is a continuum. So then we need to understand in terms of what elements are more closer to vulnerability situations and what elements are more closer to viability. So that continuum then gave us the opportunity to come together under the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership for building strong small-scale fisheries, and where we understand vulnerability, or for that matter, viability, not just as in the economic sense, but also to kind of include the social, the political, the cultural, and the ecological aspects of small-scale fisheries. But the key idea here is to see vulnerability and viability on a continuum and see how small-scale fisheries are making progression and what elements of that system is fluctuating between vulnerability and viability. We are also kind of using and drawing from the literature three well-established literature areas to understand vulnerability and viability. One is to look at the access to capitals and resources, and these are mostly livelihood capitals that I'm talking about, the social, the cultural, and then the economic, the physical resources, and everything else that is. So the access to the different types of capitals could define the level of vulnerability within a small-scale fisheries community. Similarly, well-being, which is a state of being, both at a system level, but also at the other levels within the small-scale fisheries, can be understood in material sense. Okay. Did you cut my time from the
You're wasting your time.
Okay, so we can understand, vulnerability or viability, by linking them with capitals and resources, well-being and resilience. Okay, so and how do you understand that continuum that I talked about is by focusing on the co-creation of knowledge and also creating a database or repository to manage that knowledge, synthesize and integrate the knowledge in ways that can be mobilized and disseminated across all levels, policy, community, academia, and other levels. And also looking at the right capacity that can lead to this transition from vulnerability to viability. Methodological approach, the conceptual and the methodological approach that guides our work is contained in this, and then later we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I want to focus here is the methodological approach that links well with a comprehensive case study. So we call it a place-based or context-specific, comprehensive, inclusive, diverse, and dynamic case study, because to understand the deep-rooted vulnerabilities and the prospects for viability within small-scale fisheries can only be done by looking at all aspects of the context and the case. So the case study approach, which is the methodological approach, then becomes a vehicle for understanding the transition from vulnerability to viability for us. We try to look at these case studies within 5 different domains, or looking at the 5 different categories of attributes, and I will just read them out, and hopefully we'll have time to discuss that. So those attributes lie in 5 domains, as I mentioned. One is the ecological and the environmental domain. The second is the economic and development, social and cultural influences, governance and management. And then the 5th one is the emergence, because there are many things that would just emerge given the uncertainties and complexities that we are dealing with and responding to. So therefore, we don't know what is going to emerge, but we should be ready in terms of the communities to address and respond to when they emerge. So those are the 5 categories of attributes that guide the case study research for us. I'll hand it over to Alida, and my apologies for bad presentation.
We had technical difficulties. So just a few more slides. And so we have 12 countries participating in the B2B project, 6 from Africa, 6 from Asia, each with these complex case studies, detailed, comprehensive, etc., that Pratik just mentioned. So one of the tools that we're using, both to frame the case studies in terms of their scope, but also to synthesize and understand the vulnerability to viability is the iAdapt framework. The case studies are using different research tools. It could be from a political ecology perspective, gender, governance, etc. But the iAdapt brings them all together in a common framework. So very briefly, what is iAdapt? It can be used as a research and monitoring tool. It uses the kind of rich case studies that we have here to understand vulnerability to viability. It's a means to standardize across case studies, and ultimately it can be used and intended to be used as a decision support tool. Importantly, it links the natural, social, and governing subsystems. So these three subsystems, the three pillars, are fundamental to the approach. It uses, explores the issue space from a natural, social, and governing perspective, strategies used for global change. Importantly, it includes an appraisal of success and factors that contribute to that success. I'm going to briefly say we've developed a template, which is over here, but basically that describes the case studies in rich detail. It includes questions about the system stressors. Now that's my signal to stop. So I'm just going to take a couple more seconds, and I am going to stop because everyone has to stay for 10 minutes. So our template describes these case studies, and we use that template to bring everything together. So at the beginning, in our what we call our phase one, our case studies are not very detailed yet. We haven't gone out to do the research, so we can complete some of the template, but not all, and that frames where we need to go for the next steps. So our next steps in the project are to start doing that research, and as a result of that, we'll have our rich detailed case study. We can complete the iAdapt templates and use that to start synthesizing and understanding viability to vulnerability across a range of case studies with a typology. We started working on the typology. It's just a means of classification, grouping systems, case studies that are similar to understand them. We've had a master's student, Varisha Kanya, working on this using existing case studies, so we have an idea of where we need to go. And I'm going to stop there, and thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have time for questions later. So, thank you. That was a bit of a rushed introduction, but it does set the scene, we hope, for this session. I'm going to invite Shefa Akintola to come up to present next, please. And on Friday, we're going to have to get your presentation on first, so if you don't mind, we'll get that in. So, oops, I'm not sure I meant to do that. I'll do that.
Well, it's afternoon here, wherever we are. Greetings from South Africa. Yes, the case of vulnerability and viability, I'm using a case study here of the challenge of seaweeds in Nigeria. Nigeria as a country, well, Akintola Shefa has presented and shown the, oh, I can manage this. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So Nigeria is a coastal state, and therefore challenged with these seaweeds, which often come from across the globe and then prevent the fishers from practicing their profession. It's seasonal, but when it comes into the water body, it prevents any serious fishing activities. So the fishers become vulnerable to these invasive seaweeds. Typically, there are two of them. There's the water hyacinth, and then there's the sargassum. When they come, for us, these two, they represent what we refer to as the biophysical vulnerability. And then with the consequences leading to social vulnerability, because the fishers are locked out, complain of the seaweeds covering the waterways, disrupting the grounds, the fishing grounds, the fishing nets. And for this, becoming a serious issue. Nigeria is also a oil producing state, so the issues of oil pollution is another vulnerability issue. Of course, the issue of climate change generally. But why our interest in picking this weed is because over the years, it has become a real problem even for the government. Government have tried as much as possible to find solution. And this leads to the academia coming together to look at it and finding a way to resolving the issue. Now, as a biophysical vulnerability context, the women in particular who are not able to travel far have complained that many of the time the weeds destroy their nets or also impacts on the fishing craft, and sometimes completely between the month of July, depending on the fishing ground, the weed keeps moving along the coast. So but within the period, they stay within the water body. They are sure that fishing is either abandoned or only the strong people who can move further into the shore. I mean, further away from the shore, we keep fishing. So we felt this could be an interesting dimension. Given that the government, the academia are working towards solving this problem, it brings the issue of how to see the transition from the presence of these weeds to a situation where something is given a change to where because what the government or the academia are suggesting is that there must be an economic value to solving these weeds. That once we provide alternatives, harvesting it, processing it into other industries, then it becomes easier to manage. So for us, it's a transformative change. That transition, moving from the presence of the weeds and then bringing knowledge together to solving it and converting it from a vulnerable issue to a viability issue. And then contest we wanted to work on the EBS 2019, which says it requires a fundamental system-wide reorganization across technical, technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, goals, and value. So being that the weed, how do we transform this weed to become an economic item? So in the Lagos State University, there's a Center for Sargassum Research with many scientists coming together, looking at what kind of transformation can happen on the weed, so that this weed can be turned, some of the view that it can be harvested and then to use in the aquaculture sector for feeding the fish. Also used in other feeding the animals. Some are of the opinion that it could become a form of materials to deal with the mosquitoes in the fishing community and even outside the fishing community. Also, there are issues about understanding the taxonomy of the weed, what kind of weed it is. All sorts of knowledge are coming to. So we feel that, okay, it's interesting to begin to see how does this, a material that is an issue of vulnerability, where it is transformed. When it transformed, how does this impact on the small-scale fisheries? The principal person feeling the presence of these weeds are the fishers. So the overall objective of the study is to assess how this transformative change occurring around the SSF, understand how it affects the life of the fishers in a more detailed way, identify what are the obstacles that can impede if all of these studies, multidisciplinary, comes successful. How will the benefits not move away from the fishers? So just again, even if, what are the options that can be exploited, whether from the angle of social and physical knowledge base to ensure that the SSF benefits from it. So it is also issues of policy. How do we put in place the right guidelines, the right policy to ensure that as we transit from vulnerability to viability within the context of these seaweeds, how do we enjoy that? Because at the end of the day, like the case of water hyacinths, the people benefit harvesting these hyacinths are usually outside the community. So the overview and aspiration of this project is to create a shared value system such that the fishers who are the main subjects of the impacts at the end of the day do not necessarily suffer when the goods, the cake, are cooked. So I want to thank you for listening and thank the B2B and my university for allowing me to attend this Congress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for a question if there is one. Hold on, and
Okay.
do you have any questions for people? Or the initial question? Yes, ma'am. I'll give you the microphone.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Just wanted to share some few things because in Lake Victoria we have also water hyacinth. And actually, if I could see the dangers we have mentioned, maybe there are very few. But we had also a lot of diseases around where the water hyacinth is settled in. And also animals like snake and dangerous animals also could have those areas. So actually, it was a very big problem. Actually, I just wanted to share that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, if there's no more questions, thank you again. Great.
Okay.
And our next question, our next presenter will be Friday from Malawi, please. How do you make it successful?
Go back to Zoom first. Zoom first.
Stops here.
Go to Zoom.
Yeah, this is Zoom. It's already shared.
Or do you already share?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So just to make it that, right?
Thank you very much, Alida. Good afternoon. This is a team from Malawi, and we are two here, myself and Vanessa, just at the corner, this other side. So if there are so many questions, we'll share herself and myself. Okay, the title of our presentation is to ask a question, of course. A viable fishery in a highly variable and vulnerable ecosystem. This is now a case of Lake Jiwa, a wetland. 2-3 years, the lake can dry up. 10-15 years, come back. I mean, the people can be now fishing. So it's another interesting case that we'll be looking at. For the sake of time, I'll be skipping some of the presentation, slides. But the objective we are looking at to review contribution of ecological status and governance towards viability of the fishery, considering high variability of the lake. The questions are what contributes to the recovery of the small-scale fishery after 2 to 3 years of recession? Are there any threats? How about opportunities? As Pratik indicated, I think, and Alida, we are applying adapt. And we'll see whether it is relevant for this particular ecosystem. That's the lake, southern part of Lake Malawi, shared between Malawi and Mozambique. It's lying at 604 meters of sea level. The surface area varies on seasonal as well as on periodic basis. It's a Ramsar site declared in 1997. It's an enclosed system, no outlet. And the 3 dominant species, Barbus originosus, Orochromys ranus, and Clarias crapinus. In normal years, when the water level is stable, the catches can go up to 25,000 metric tons. And in 1979, it was valued at 18 million US dollars. Only the fishery component. But I look at also bird hunting, you are looking at the agricultural rice production. But the main component, the fishery part, went up to somewhere around 18 million US dollars. Population is quite high within the area. But the issue is what I've talked about, the variability on a seasonal basis as well as periodic basis. So you can see some beds, that's why it was declared, the Ramsar site. And you can see the post there, the billboard. Lake Jiwa is an important wetland. Let's use it wisely. As a Ramsar site, there should be need to conserve and utilize the resource wisely with or by use, involving the communities. I'll not go into the importance, of course, it's on livelihood, but also site of international importance, and also in terms of transportation, and even the agricultural site. So you can see the fish production, the trend. It was first reported that the lake dried up in 1900, and between 1900 to 1995, it dried up 6 times. So we had a case in 1994-96, we had another one in 2014, and just 3 years ago, the lake dried up. It has just recovered. So you can see the water level, it changes. So in terms of the adapt framework, there are 4 dimensions, as Sarita has pointed out, and Pratik.
But what we are focusing much in this particular presentation is how does the fishery come back? Bounce back after the recession? The livelihoods could also be another dimension that we are looking at. So in terms of the components, we are looking at political ecology, gender empowerment. I will not do much on that. Suffice to say that in terms of gender, maybe 80,000 fishers do operate on the lake. 60% now being on the processing side as well as trading part of it. This was a frame survey which was started out that time, 1979, but has also been done 2 or 3 years ago. Sociological resilience and adaptive capacity, I think this is our main focus. What's the biological status of the species we mentioned? So it says the fishery production of between 80 to 160 kg per hectare a year. It means the ecosystem is highly productive. And in terms of biodiversity, of course, we have got 27 species, but only 3 dominant ones, which I indicated. But also Lake Chilo has lower Simpson diversity index than Lake Malawi. And on the shoreline area, there's thick emergent vegetation, which also maybe is part and parcel of recovery issue that assists the fish to recover, because it becomes difficult for fishermen to exploit just directly. Pollution is also another issue, especially in terms of fertilizer application, but also there are some rivers that go through, or two or three rivers that pass through a town, Zomba. So if you look at the interactive and multi-level governance, it's also another angle we are looking at. The lake is shared between 3 districts within Malawi, but internationally we share with Mozambique. And on the Mozambique side, they call it Shirwa. I think Maria is here. I've seen it. Shirwa on the other side. So we have got 3 traditional authorities. We have got resource user committees. We call beach village committees. They are 48. And then we have got some NGOs as well. And we have got the MOU signed between Malawi and Mozambique. That was in 2016, and we're yet to revisit that. Why? Because the policy and the legislative frameworks are different. So we normally have conflicts. The other side is closed, the other side is not closed. One side says no sinning, the other side is sinning. So because of that, I think at upper level, the government has to sit down and come up with an MOU. Well-being and sustainable livelihoods. Yeah, I think the main strategies in terms of livelihood strategies, we're looking at their own seasonal and periodic. It's a long list, but farming is part of it, especially maize and rice, fishing. There's what we call village savings and loans associations. We are looking at the seasonal and the periodic inter and intra-lake migration. Intra is within the same lake. When the water is on the other side and is receding, you'll see fishes migrating from the northern part to the southern part. When the lake is no more, you have fishes now moving out to the other lakes, and they cause conflicts in those areas. Casual laborers, people can work in estates. There's food, also food aid, because it means there's food insecurity. Some people work in South Africa, they fish themselves, and they also market maybe fish products and other products. The funny part is that the 2018 recession, it was a bit interesting to see communities producing charcoal from one of the islands within the lake, unlike in the past, which means this is a big threat to the whole ecosystem. I'll go to the threats and gaps in proper use of the land, deforestation, climate change. Of course, we are looking at cyclones, pollution, I've mentioned about it, limited collaboration among stakeholders, including the countries. Although we say about the MOU, but the countries, the governments don't meet regularly. It takes time. Unless there's a crisis somewhere, then it's when they come to sit down and say, what is the problem? There are also some bad practices in terms of fishing. There are some fishermen who try to clear the area so that it's easier for them to catch the fish, which is quite detrimental. and then limited capacity in assessing the vulnerability part of it. Opportunities are there. Like what we had 2 days ago, water and communities, lake and communities, ocean and communities, there's a bit of interrelatedness. Catch of value, they do vary it. Multi-level governance, interactive governance is there. We're talking about co-management, decentralization, but also lecturer-based engagement, trust is there, and also there are projects, ongoing projects to build resilience among the communities, especially when the lake dries up. So in summary, we are looking at why does the lake, this is what we are revisiting. We are yet to go into the field study. Maybe the fish species that we're dealing with, they're prolific breeders, which is okay, which is quite okay. We have read. Catfish can survive in the mud. Even when it is dry, you find it maybe after 2-3 years, can come back. But also some fish survive in the rivers, and also like gold. And the strategies that communities put in place when the lake dries up, there's a bit of corrective action. They ban fishing in all the lagoons and the remnant water pools. They also enforce bylaws, especially at traditional level, and there's occupation shifts, and of course also migration. So in terms of final thoughts, as a summary, is to look at what contributes to the viability. Although this is important because we haven't yet finalized the study, is the interactive governance being in place, but also we are looking at also ecosystem health conservation plans, because right now we are looking at not only aquatic area, but also even the catchment area. But we should also encourage best practices to maintain a vegetation, and there should be need to look at the alternative levels, mainly for the women and the youth. These may, we are saying, could be contributing to the periodic viability on the lake. Most efficient. Thank you very much.
Friday, and we have time for a quick question while we transition. Our next speaker is Kari Yama from Senegal. Kari, so does anyone have a question for Friday while Kari comes? We are going to have a discussion period at the end. So think about, as we listen to these presentations, think about what we mean by vulnerability and viability and how that might apply to the fisheries in the own area where you come from. And maybe in our discussion session, you may want to share some of those experiences or speak more to what you're hearing in terms of the case studies that we're talking about here. Okay, so Kadi is a company from Senegal.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Khadia Moussa. I come from Senegal and I'm a lecturer at Cheikh Anta Diop University. So the title of our reflection today is about coastal erosion and overexploitation of fishery resources in Senegal. What approaches to transform vulnerabilities of small-scale fisheries into viability? So we focus our reflection on these two aspects of coastal erosion and overexploitation because they are part of the main sources of vulnerability of fishermen in Senegal. So this is the outline. So I will just start by the brief context by saying that around the world, small-scale fishery is characterized today by an overexploitation of resources. And there is also the fact that the fishermen who also non-selective fishing here, and this leads to a decrease of fish yield. And in addition to this anthropogenic factor, we have the phenomenon of climate change, which is today a big issue for small-scale fishermen. Climate change affects negatively small-scale fishing in Senegal. And this situation has led today to the emergence of integrated management approach. We have seen that in the scientific literature, many studies on small-scale fishing use these approaches that take into account the interaction between natural and socio-economic systems in fisheries. So when we come in Senegal in particular, the island population are exposed to the risk of marine submersion and coastal area. You see that in almost all the fishing areas, they are affected by this climate change, mainly by coastal erosion. and we have an increase of the level of extreme weather events that are evident in some coastal areas, just as the Salum Delta. And as in the other country also, fishermen do not comply with the required regulation. They are still using prohibited monofilament that do not look for the species. And this overexploitation of fisheries resources threaten the income of fishermen and add to this phenomenon of climate change. So the question of the vulnerability of fishing community and the viability is absolutely yes. And this aspect, so regarding this aspect, our study has main objective to analyze the vulnerability of small-scale fishing in order to propose an approach for transforming vulnerabilities into viability. And from this main objective, we derive 3 specific objectives. The first one is to characterize the vulnerability of small-scale fishermen. So here we have defined what is vulnerability, what is viability in the area of small-scale fishery. We have also given the typology of vulnerability that we have. And the second specific objective is to analyze the different process of transformation of vulnerability into viability. And the last one is to analyze and give some response or action to making fishing activities viable. So how we do this? As methodological approach, we use an integrated approach of transforming the vulnerability of fishermen into viability based on 2 steps. The first one is the systematic literature review, and the second step is field observation and interview. So this systematic literature review has allowed us to, as I said, define what is vulnerability, what is viability, and with all these typology of vulnerability and viability that we have in the small-scale fisheries. And also, it allows us to determine the sources of vulnerability of Senegalese fisheries and to understand the vulnerabilities of these fishermen as well as their consequences on their livelihood. And regarding the field observation and interview, they allow us first to complete the systematic literature review and to see if what we have in the literature is in phase to what we have in the field, and also to collect the perception of fishermen on the effect of climate change on the overexploitation of resources, and also to collect their strategy or action for transforming vulnerabilities into viability. So here we have the vulnerability sources. So this point create the vulnerability regarding the coastal erosion. As in Senegal, the main climate risks that are source of vulnerability in coastal areas are the rising of sea level and coastal erosion. And almost all the fishing area in Senegal suffer from this coastal erosion. For example, we have here in this picture, so the fishing area of Jawal Fajouk, where there is an increase of coastal erosion, because in the 2 weeks' time, the distance between the coastal and the fishing both increased from 15 to 20 meters. And when we take another case here in Saint-Louis also, the recent episodes of flooding have forced the family of fishermen to migrate or to move to settle in non-submersible areas. And when we come to John Watt, which is our case study in the project, they are suffering a lot from this coastal erosion, which has considerably modified the biotop for fish species, and this has increased the degradation of mangroves and the decline in number and size of almost all fish and shellfish. So regarding the vulnerability related to overexploitation of fisheries, the table that we have here shows some type of gear that are used in January particularly, and their negative consequences on the environment and species. And we see that in Senegal, the percentage of overexploitation of some species have reached a worrying level. We have some statistics here, 70% against 3% for underexploited species, and 1% for the recovery of stock. And we see that coastal demersal resources have been globally overexploited, leading to a drastic reduction of species to we have here 50% to 90%, depending on the species. And the species that are more affected are the Echinophoros aereus, shrimps also are affected, Solea and Pajou. So what we have here, so after doing the literature review, going to the field and talking to fishermen, the table that we have here show some strategy that they told us that allow them or help them to try to use from vulnerability to viability, particularly in January. The first strategy is the resilience of fishermen or fishery system to climate change. So they are trying to be resilient to climate change because there are some projects financed by the Adaptation Fund and the Climate Fund that help population to reforest the mangrove. There's also the establishment of marine protected area by the government along the coast has helped them a lot because there's NPAR because of biodiversity, manage natural resources, and protect also the species. So the second strategy is the adaptation of fishery system to climate change. So how they adapt by using income strategy, just a diversification of activities. Some of them migrate, and there are also strategies for organizing or mobilizing financial or material resources. The third strategy is the diversification of activities and income, because there are some of them, mainly the women, they are processing food, they are processing fisheries, they also do market gardening, small-scale commercial activities, and also women there, when there is the period of biological rest, what they say that is that they try to transit from processing fishery to process agro-forestry product, and this helps them to earn the money that they lost during the period of loss. And in this area also of January, there are some projects that promote and provision of steady line the women that process to carry out the income generating activities. So the last strategy is the strategy for organizing and mobilizing resources. So there are the establishment of local fishery committees, which have improved the level of participation of fishermen in local decisions, even if they still have some problem with the CFPA. But there is also, they also do the restriction of social professional organization through the creation of local union federation. So fishermen used to be on federation or union to help each other. There is also the establishment of modern fish processing unit in some area in the village of Northern Parima, which is part of Jonwa. There is this kind of processing unit, modern fish processing unit. Okay. This is just the recommendation that we derive from our results to make a sustainable management small-scale fishing in Senegal. The first one is to promote good local governance of marine fisheries, to set up an information system and strengthen communication between local committee of fishing because it is important, and also to strengthen the entrepreneurial capacity of women working in the small-scale fisheries sector. Thank you for your attention.
Any questions for Paddy while we change to our next speaker? Okay, I'm going to go to Cesar. Do you have one question already?
Generally, we see that marine protected areas and tenure relationships become tenuous in that kind of situations. People do not, from my experience working, people do not see as a strategy for viability, but here it is actually looked at as a strategy. I would like you to explain a little more so that we can understand how this tenure relationship plays out when people think about viability and vulnerability strategies for themselves.
Okay, this situation of a marine protected area is specifically for the case in Jonwa, which is one fishing area. And we were in the field asking for population, what are they doing to try to move from vulnerability to viability? And what fishermen told to us is that there's the APA help them sometimes to be resilient because they allow to conserve and protect species. Because there, what we see is that fishermen they are in harmony, so they don't have a lot of problem within them. Even in their local committee, they are in harmony and try to help each other. So this is what we collect from them, saying us that this MPA, even if it does not work for the other fishing area, that they help them also to try to be resilient to the effects of climate change.
question, I'm afraid. Our next speaker is Evan Zariki from Ghana. Evan, you're up. And if you have more questions, hopefully we'll have time at the end. If not, catch Cardi at the break. Sure, probably. A quick one.
The way I see from Friday's presentation, even the other one, the first one on the water health, I think we are looking much on the ecological vulnerability, but I would think maybe one, I mean, there is a mix of some socioeconomic methods integrating, like household socioeconomic surveys, resource use pattern, what do people get their livelihood from January to December, something like that, so that they can really tie with the ecological vulnerability.
So I'm going to ask everyone to keep that comment in mind because we have several more presentations in the second session too. And what you just said is absolutely a part of these different studies. They may not have been highlighted here yet, but they're very integrated, ecological, economic, and social. So please be patient.
Thank you. I hope Alida doesn't show me the remaining time before I finish. Well, my name is Evan Speciarizi. I'm from Ghana. And this afternoon, I'm going to present on the topic, the Pra estuary in Ghana, a fishing hotspot under degradation. So those of you who do not know where Ghana is located, Ghana is in West Africa. And this is a map of the world showing where Ghana is located. So if you look at the African map, Ghana is where it is shaded red. Ghana has a total area of about 239,000 kilometers square. Ghana shares a border with Togo to the east, Ivory Coast to the west, Burkina Faso to the north, and the Gulf of Guinea to the south. Ghana is blessed with abundant aquatic ecosystems and resources. The Pra estuary happens to be one of these aquatic ecosystems. I'm going to talk about the Pra estuary. This is the location of the Pra estuary. It's located in the western part of Ghana. And that is a map of Ghana up there, showing the location of the estuary. The estuary has a total area of about 10 kilometers square. The banks of the estuary are occupied by mangroves. There's a vibrant fishery that exists in this ecosystem. And although there are several species that are exploited, the dominant species is black-chin tilapia. The scientific name is Cerathodon melanoteron. The fishery provides livelihood for about 25,000 people, including 10,000 fishers and 15,000 women and children. These are some of the fishing gears and methods that are deployed in the estuary. You have the cast net, the scoop net, the gill net, and hand picking. The hand picking is usually done by women and children. So this is a map showing the critical or essential areas of the estuary. You have the breeding grounds of the fishes, the management areas, the fishing areas, and fishing communities of the estuary. Unfortunately, this estuary is in a very bad state
because of some illegal gold activities that are going on. So there's mining, illegal gold mining around the estuary. And I'm going to show you a picture of the present state of the estuary. So before the advent of the gold mining, that was the nature of the estuary. So clean, so beautiful. But now, because of the illegal mining activities, look at the estuary. It looks like coffee with milk. So terrible. And this is a picture showing where the river meets the sea. And you can see the difference, which is not good. Another picture to show the aerial view of the meeting point of the river and then the seawater. As it stands, the governance and management systems of the estuary are based on local traditional and national regulations. However, the Fisheries Commission of Ghana is in charge of the management and governance of the estuary. Yet, the estuary is in a very poor state. As an intervention, some NGOs organized a forum where all the relevant stakeholders came together to co-develop a management plan. It's a community-based fisheries management plan. And these are some of the stakeholders: the Fisheries Commission, the Shaman District Assembly, Wildlife Division of the Forestry Commission, people from academia, particularly from the University of Cape Coast, where I belong, Environmental Protection Agency, and some representatives from the neighboring or adjoining fishing communities. And the picture on your right is the section of the cover of the document. That is the plan. Now, these are some of the key objectives in the plan. One is to restore the fishery. And two is to restore the degraded mangroves. So the mangroves around the estuary are being exploited. And then three, to improve the living conditions of the fisher folk. And four, to develop human capacity of the local communities and district assembly towards the management and conservation of the estuarine ecosystem. So this is a map to show you the management areas that have been mapped, an indication that we are poised to save this beautiful water system. And this is a map to show you the two types of closures that have been implemented in the estuary. The portion shaded red is a permanent closure. So the place is closed permanently to fishing. And the area shaded yellow is a temporary closure. So at some point of the year, it is open to fishing. And those of us from UCC, from academia, you are also expected to support the implementation of the plan. And this is our contribution. We are to assess the biological and socio-ecological impact of these closures in the estuary. And we want to be in collaboration with V2V, Global Partnership, and maybe some other partners to help implement this management plan. And it is my hope that this collaboration will help us to move the fishery from vulnerability to viability.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you. I mean, we even kept the time, so stay there. There might be some questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Maniva, you're our next speaker. But yeah, so any questions for Evans? Please. But perhaps, Evans, you can tell us a bit more about how the stakeholders were involved in the development of this plan, because it clearly didn't happen overnight. What kind of time period? Did you have meetings like this? Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Okay. So let me say it was led by this NGO, Friends of the Nation. What they did was that they invited all the stakeholders, the Fisheries Commission. They wrote to them to indicate that they had to come for a meeting. And so a meeting was held, I think in Accra also. And all the stakeholders, they were given transport, they were given money per diem to go and then draft this management plan. And it was an opportunity for the representatives from the fishing community, so that plan is like, it will be for the fishermen. This is coming from you. This is a plan you have helped to develop. And so it will not look like it is coming from the government and it is being imposed on them. So a lot of planning went into that, and they officially or formally invited them to such meetings to develop that. Yes.
Okay, our next speaker is Manila Isaacs, student for session.
Thank you very much, Adida. I do feel a little bit tired, like a graveyard hour. That's what we call it. I hope you are also not too tired. So, okay. For the camera. All right. Yes, we've got a lot of people online. So what I've tried to do in my presentation for the session is to look at a species, a particular area, and to kind of understand this in terms of the high risk, the high value, with regard to the abalone species in South Africa. So this is also from contributions from Team SA that include Mafa, Hara, and Tracy. Okay, so the abalone species, these are the empty shells, and that is taken during spring. So my key questions for this presentation is also to link this more particularly to the IADAPT framework, and to ask specific questions that are linked to the IADAPT framework, and try to kind of bring some of the case study nuances into this. So I will look at what is the main issue, what are the main stresses, what's the state of governance, and what are the vulnerability and viability contexts, something similar to what Pratik presented in terms of the link between viability and vulnerability in context of this presentation species. So the main issue is basically identified that you have a very high value species abalone, and it is a part of organized crime networks. And this results in both vulnerability and viability. And sometimes it is quite interactive. And we're looking at coastal communities in the Southern Cape Coast. One of the reasons why we chose abalone, because what we also looked at the IADAPT template is to look what data is there. And one of the species where there's a lot of data is the abalone species. So if you look around the Cape Coast and where we're at, and you look across to Robben Island, that is a hotspot of abalone poaching. This is here in Cape Town, and you see Robben Island is on there, Hout Bay where we were the other day, Cape Point as you go around, and then up down to Cape Agulhas. Then you also get poaching further up the coast. So a lot of the work that I have been doing in the past is on the Buffelsjagtsbaai. And this is what earlier the government official in the previous presentation also declared this as an aquaculture development zone. So Buffelsjagtsbaai is a small community, and I have 2 representatives here from Buffelsjagtsbaai that stays there. And a lot of issues around tenure, land issues, housing issues, issues around infrastructure in terms of this Buffelsjagts communities, about 150 kilometers from Cape Town, and the municipality is Overstrand local municipality. So the community struggles with a number of access, and also looking at how to sustain their livelihoods through marine resources, both, and also coastal resources. So a key part of this issue is bringing the viability and vulnerability project deeply rooted into small-scale fisheries and small-scale fisheries policy in South Africa. So we do have the state of what small situational analysis on small-scale fisheries that we've already published about a month ago through the Vulnerability to Viability Network. And you will find a copy there. So when we look at a vulnerability in this context, we looked at the vulnerability also not only in terms of the state of the species, because there's definitely the species is under threat and almost at places extinct, but also the vulnerability next to that in terms of communities. So human rights-based approaches, food security, livelihood, poverty, access and tenure are all key concepts that kind of frame the vulnerability of the communities there. And this, as was mentioned earlier in this meeting, also relates to the how local instruments also relate to international guidelines and instruments that are important. I'm not going to go into much detail of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, but also what I was mentioned at the beginning in the opening session is the social and economic justice of small-scale fisheries. So that is the state of the main issue. So what are the main stresses when we look at and think of this high-value species and also high risk? There's definitely an environmental crisis in terms of the species, high unemployment rate. Abalone species has also been used as a form of resistance poaching. You don't give us rights, so we will take the rights in our own hands, and we will access no matter what you say in terms of going against government law. Gender plays a particular big role in terms of the main stresses, how it impacts women. Aquaculture as part of the blue economy in terms of big, large-scale aquaculture is big. Gangs and illegal trade is a big issue in the as part of the main stresses. And then also the lack of livelihood opportunities. Some of the scale of governments that you have there, it is happen at local, provincial, national, and also national police and military. And it's also international in terms of the trade. So what was a earlier decided, sorry, I needed to go back, stay on that slide a bit, is the TURF, the territorial user right fisheries, that is almost a co-management arrangement that was tried with abalone species and it failed. So yeah, it's just, you know, this is one of the big concessions that have been given to an abalone big aquaculture farm, and the community that stays there just on the rocks in front. So there are 3 big abalone farms in that particular area, and that also adds to the stress. And as of you've seen before, communities like to protest, and they protest in terms of their access to water, sanitation, housing, fishing rights, abalone farm are all part, and this is part of a community protest. Okay. These are just some of the government governance initiatives that have been, a whole list of failed governance initiatives that was invested, and I'm not gonna say too much on that, but this is actually the slide that I wanted to spend a little bit more time on. So when looking at the concept of vulnerability and viability in terms of the abalone poaching, you will see that vulnerability is often linked to the social, economic, physical, political vulnerabilities of coastal communities. That definitely adds to their vulnerability. The role of women and the position of women and their social responsibilities that they have makes them vulnerable, but also their physical vulnerabilities. Inequality, poverty, rights allocation are all part of the vulnerability. Then they are, on the other side, it is high value. So because of the high value, you could also see the monetary value in terms of viability. And that viability is often linked to the high value in terms of the Chinese market. But that viability can also go back to make you incredibly, very quickly vulnerable when you are part of a crime syndicate. There is violence, it's high risk, killings and imprisonment. So the line between viability and vulnerability, as Pratik earlier said, it's not straightforward. And these loops between abalone poaching that makes you vulnerable and can make you viable at the same time. But also there's the local poachers are also upset with the outside poachers. And this sector attracts a lot of youth. So it would be really interesting to kind of look at how this concept evolves when we do the deeper in-depth fieldwork as to how that abalone poaching is situated within the V2V framework. Thank you, Alida, for the extra minute.
Thank you very much, Anita. We have a quick question for Anita, then we'll spend a couple of minutes to open up, and then we'll have 2 questions next. So I just want to give anyone an opportunity. Yes, question about everyone. Mike.
Good afternoon, I'm Fabian Mohammed. I was doing a research regarding late abalone poaching a few months ago. And me, myself, is situated now in a situation where our disposable fishers has been involved in all these activities. What happened is that there is an established abalone farm close to our coastline where we are working at the sea. And what happened, some of the specks did get out into the ocean, the sea, and start, improve, grow in their own habitat where they actually belong. So now we are having actually access to the abalone. And that is what our fishermen are doing. They generate an income for them because we already apply a government. We tell them, while we are not recognized as small-scale fishes yet, why can't we, as the small-scale fishers, not apply for a ranching permit in the department to improve our own livelihood, to regenerate work in our own place as small-scale fishers, because we are now facing the MRLA, and that is where the MRLA is now actually gone for us as fishers, because we are not implemented as small-scale fishers. Once we are being catch with the abalone, we are being judged and we will be sentenced, even if you take it for your household. And to me, it's ridiculous from government, because the resource is there, it's available for us to improve our own livelihood, but we are not allowed to have it, even to have two per household. We must apply for a permit at the department. Thank you very much.
I think it's more comments that she made than asking me to respond to what was, and I'm not disagreeing to what she's saying. Thank you.
In all these presentations, also in yours, we see that small fisheries communities are vulnerable to stressors and drivers that come from the outside. And in the blue economy, they are likely to increase. But could it be that the blue economy and some of its stressors that comes from the fact that small-scale fisheries depend on the system that is unpredictable and often becomes deliver shocks to small-scale fisheries? Could it be that some of the things that make small-scale fisheries vulnerable to these external shocks are internal, and that these external shocks, the economy, etc., are exposing those internal vulnerabilities? We are, we often talk about small-scale fisheries as a social economic system, and that means that activities are dependent on each other. And so what happens to one of these activities is going to affect others. So you might, in a good case, have exponential growth, but in other situations you may have exponential decay. A system that falls apart due to the fact that they are a system that is poorly organized and certainly not robust enough to deal with its stresses. So rather than always looking outside in order to deal with vulnerability, we might also take a good look at what is happening in the community, how they are organized, how they are structured, etc.
Sven, I think you make a good, also because we are having to go and do the field work, and I think that these are the kind of questions that I think we will add value to what we already know. So this would be prior work that has been done already. So these questions in terms of what internally is happening, what happening in communities definitely affects or even deepen the issues of non-fishing activities like the blue economy and stresses. So I would agree that is that's definitely an issue, and you will have research co-management and also poverty knows that very well as to what the internal structures and issues of within communities are there, because the one that I have in understanding the community, the viability and vulnerability, is that, say for example, you take, and Tracy will speak to it next. So for example, you take something about technology, it makes some viable and it makes others even more vulnerable. So sometimes these things are also issues. The same of result, and it makes others some more vulnerable and some less more viable. And often it's women that are at the receiving end of being more vulnerable.
Thank you very much, Maneva. I've been told that we have to stop because we've got about 10 minutes. We're supposed to start again at 4:15, 4:15. So while we pause, we'll take a 10-minute break. Then we have our next session. And then we also plan to have a discussion after that session. And if we want to keep discussing after our official time's over, then we're happy to stay here as long as you want to ask questions. So I don't want to cut off conversation, but I do know that people want to go grab coffee and we have to start again at 6:15, so we've got 10 minutes. Is that okay? Thank you to all the speakers.